the Ice Cube issue 10 issue of the Source
Yeah, with the
is
brick
where I
wall. Yeah, that.
is where I believe the Source, the myth of the Source, the legend of the Source, the idea of the Source, and the Source as we know it, all five of those variations. Um,
That's
no,
a
I
lot.
think that's when it came alive with. So, how did you have to know that at the rate where you're giving the album's ratings,
Yeah.
that was going to spark something in the industry. Did you first of all, how are, because all the time when I ask journalists and they all say the same thing, hey, I just review the record and then the editor decides what the ratings are. How are you guys like for that summer issue? All right, for those that don't know, um, I think issue 10 was Ice Cube on the cover. This is like late spring of 1990, and they're pretty much going to review uh, every album that will come out in the summer of 1990.
Yes.
And the opinions, again, before the Source, um, you just got blurbs and mention. You really didn't get much on like quality. So it's not like if Right On Magazine is talking about Michael Jackson's Off the Wall record, they're going to offer anything really critical to how important this is. It'll just be like, hey, as a new album, and it's a single, Don't Stop the Evening and Rock With You. No, he's going on tour with his brothers. Like, you just basically got like bullet point facts. You never got opinions. And this is the first time that we're seeing opinions. Probably, probably one of the most craziest moments. So that's the issue. First of all, we learned what five mics were. Um, and
Yeah.
that's the issue where I believe, and I'm going off memory. This is how devoted I was. I know that Edutainment by BDP got five. I know that America's Most Wanted, Ice Cube got five. I
Deservedly
know
so.
I
Yes.
know that Eric B. and Rakim's Let the Rhythm Hit Him got five. And Edutain, I said Edutainment, right?
Yes.
Edutainment, America's people Tribe, People's Instinctive Travels in the Paths of Rhythm. The moment, it's weird enough because even with those four records, I could see Rakim and BDP like, okay, they've released another classic record. I see. I didn't know much about Tribe, and I was happy because I was like, anyone under that De La Soul umbrella, I'm happy to see that there's more zaniness coming from that corner of the world. And of course, yeah, I instantly knew that the Cube thing was classic because that was like I had it. However, the most shocking review of that whole issue, where you guys, I think, went through maybe 20 records, I don't know. You guys gave Fear of a Black Planet a very simple 3.5 stars, which by that point, every critic was just gaga over anything Public Enemy did. And I never thought I'd see the day where someone would offer, well, wait a minute, let's reconsider that, and gave like actual things that stick with me to this day. And I hate that. It's not that I hate that, but I'm very much influenced until maybe, okay, the last 10 years. I was very much influenced by what a reputable critic would say about an album. And when I saw that, I was like, yo, they're trying to make a statement here. Like, it's not burning a bridge. Like 3.5 is not bad, but it wasn't
Yeah, that 3.5 was
it wasn't the high praise that America's Most Wanted got or that sort of thing. And like, but you guys were just fearless.
which do
And
you think which do you think was a better album in retrospect? Fear of a Black Planet or America's Most Wanted?
oh, dog, come on, stop playing. The first three songs on America. Here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing. So now that I know soup to nuts on how that album got made,
Yes.
I do know that the true all-star lineup of the Bond Squad, meaning both Shockleys,
Sadler.
Sadler, and
Yeah.
Chuck
Yeah.
really had their hands in the first three songs. And then, as we, even though they got the entire record, I can tell where like Cube had more input
Yeah.
versus, oh, this is a straight up Bomb Squad song. So it's almost like I really consider America's Most Wanted the first three, songs. Even though that entire album is mind blowing, for me, it's almost like it's I consider the first three songs almost its own world. And then when you get to Once Upon the Projects to the rest, I consider that like another album. But um
I could see that. I could see
you're
that. Yeah.
you're absolute. I mean, you're right. I think had we not received Terror Dome and Fight the Power previously, then we could see it as, yes, just as equal to Nation of Millions. But you guys kind of taught me that like retrospect soundtrack songs making appearances on an album long after the fact that, that okay, it doesn't count. But I mean, it wasn't snark whatsoever, but it let me know that rating let me know how serious you guys were about music journalism.
Okay.
And but did you guys realize at that point that you are about to enter a very, very slow game of chicken with the industry in terms of like, now there's expectations of what my mic should be. There should be,
You
like
set a standard.
Yeah.
set a standard that we never had before.
Right.
Okay, so I first of all, thanks for the compliments. I understand and agree with what you're saying in that we were the first publication really to be critical of rap, but in a meaningful way, and coming from a place where we loved rap. We wanted to. It wasn't really that complicated. It was once we came up with the idea for the ratings, and I don't remember exactly what issue that was. That could have been the first issue where that happened. I don't recall.
I think the LL issue was the first issue with before
ratings.
it was mics. It was like records or broken.
It was like an exploding record, yeah, and then it became mics, yeah. And around that time, I also met another early source staffer named Reginald C. Dennis. He was a Harlem-based hip hop head who showed up in a three-piece suit when he came for his first interview, and I was wearing I was wearing like a t-shirt and jeans and a baseball hat, and in walks like this guy wearing a suit, and we hit it off. And because we bonded over rap music, and we hit it off. And Reggie became kind of our first music editor, and that most of the ratings happened under his tenure. I mean, I was the editor in chief, and James Bernard was like a important managing editor. Also, I should mention Chris Wilder, my lifelong friend, another Philadelphia guy. He's the guy that kind of really he's the guy that brought me to Rubber Park. He was the guy that introduced me to hip hop culture in a real way. He was part of our staff as well, another editor there. And during that time, that was when, so we moved 1990. It's a great turning point because that was when we basically graduated from college. We moved the business to New York City. I remember literally listening to America's Most Wanted on the drive from Boston to New York. Like that was like the newest album at that moment.
Right.
And we moved into 594 Broadway, which was right at Broadway in Houston in New York City. And without even realizing, we were in the perfect place for the magazine. I mean, the reason we chose that building was because Bill Stephanie and Hank Shockley were actually friends of ours. I had met Bill Stephanie at some point along the way, and they had Soul Records, which was kind of post Public Enemy.
Sounds of Urban Listeners.
Correct. And
they were always good for an acronym.
That's correct. Yes. And Bill, as you know, is one of the greatest guys of all time.
Right.
And so he brought us in, and he's like, hey, his office was in the same building. So he said, hey, there's room in this building. I know
where's the location?
594 Broadway in Houston.
The same place where October '94 happened.
All of it happened. Yes, all of it
Oh
happened at
God. Okay.
594 Broadway. Yep. So
All right.
so basically, yeah. So that was 1990. So we moved the business there. In the beginning, we had one room, and it was about 9, 10 people, and we had like literal. It was like something out of a cartoon. It was like there was like one room with like 6 phones and 9 people, and like the cords would be crossed in the middle of the room, and it would there was nowhere to hide. It was like you were just everyone was hearing everything, and it was just kind of like a chaos. And then after a few months of that, we upgraded to like a little bit of a bigger space with like several rooms. And then at some point we divided it in sort of like business and editorial.
I was going to say one of your star players, friend of the show, Dream Hampton,
Of course.
has recently created possibly one of the most mind-blowing blowingest documentaries I've seen as of late. Um, entitled "It Was All a Dream," where I mean, essentially, her years as a NYU student, she basically just always kept a camera handy, no matter where she was, and she has all of these magic moments. And there's a moment where she is in the office of what I assume the storied Mind Squad or whoever,
Yes.
the source starting 10, and literally like just to peep in that world for uh it's all of 14, 15 seconds, but
I
i
was
I always wondered what that environment was like.
I had the same reaction. I saw Dream was kind enough to show me a screening of the film. And yeah, it was I had never seen that footage. That was my first time seeing that footage. Of it was like I think it was around 92, 93
Yeah.
ish. And she's in the office with a camera. I remember that she was around with a camera, but I had never seen the footage until very recently. But it is a great film. I definitely highly recommend that
So
people watch it.
once word gets around, how do you guys know who is reputable in terms of like uh their writing skills or their knowledge of the music?
So, some people already had a name because they had written for other places, and that would be, the names I mentioned, like Nelson George, Harry
Right.
Allen. Then there were people that came up organically because either they were friends of a friend or they literally just showed up at our office one day. I don't
Bones.
recall. Bones Malone
Bones
is an
Malone.
example
Right,
of
right,
that.
right.
Bones
Classic.
Malone is an example of someone who showed up, but he had already had some bylines in, I think in Spin or possibly other places. He had a very distinctive writing style. Bones wrote, with his own language, basically, if you
Hmm.
remember.
Yeah, I do.
Um, Dream, I don't recall how Dream showed up, but she did show up at some point. I don't remember how she entered our world, but there she was, this brilliant woman, and we needed women voices, to be honest. And we were pretty much a very male heavy operation,
Hmm.
and I knew in my heart that we needed more women. And so I immediately assigned her first writing for us, which was to review HWA, Hose with Attitude.
I remember
Yeah, and so
one and
Dream,
a half mics.
she gave it like one mic or something,
One and a
right?
half mics.
Yes,
Right.
exactly, exactly. But that was necessary. That was a necessary step because we had to put it in. We put it in perspective and Dream. Know who could be a better person than Dream to do that. We were lucky that she came along because she, be one of a kind voice. And then along the way, listen, we're talking about those days. I need to mention Maddie C, who
Yes.
is, was my very close friend prior to even the very earliest days of the source. Matt actually coincidentally knew both me and Dave Mays just by chance. And then when the source was starting, he, in a lot of ways, I mean, as I think back on it, represented really the core of the Mind Squad taste in music. Maddie C was the essence of like our taste in music because him and I were very often aligned in our taste, but not always. But
Hmm.
Maddie C was ahead, so far ahead of the curve in understanding hip hop and having good taste.
Who
And
who who had the most influence in term like what are the sides of uh the tug of war rope in terms of like who's more esoteric, who's more who's more who's more 3 feet high and rising, and who's more life is too short, like, and how do you know how to be objectionable?
That's a great question. I mean, one of the earliest challenges we had was dealing with regionalism. We referred to it earlier when you had your experience. There were so many examples. The
I was,
only
I was going to
place,
say the Too Short reviews are probably a good example of albums that are now deemed classic now, that
yes, we
through
made it trash. Yeah.
through our lens. Yeah. So
Yeah.
how does that work?
We were always accused of being New York centric because, quite frankly, we were. I mean,
Right.
I was from Philly, but we were East Coast centric people in terms of our taste in music. But very early on, if you look at when we were still the voice of the rap music industry, we actually were running columns from Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco,
Yeah. Davey
Atlanta,
D had his thing in San
Chicago.
Francisco.
Yeah,
Right.
we were Seattle. I mean, we were one of the first media entities to recognize that there was hip hop in other parts of the United States besides New York and LA. And another one that was doing it was Yo MTV Raps. So even way after I had left Yo MTV Raps and now I'm doing the source full time, we were kind of the only national hip hop media, platforms that existed. But there was a an ongoing tension that existed between East and West Coast, different tastes. Too Short is a great example. Here's another example: NWA, who I
Mm-hmm.
love from the first second. I mean, the first Eazy-E record. Everything Dre did. I was like the biggest Dr. Dre fan ever.
Mm-hmm.
But in a weird way, we were playing a lot of that on our radio show. We were playing, all the Dr. Dre stuff. I went back to Philly, I remember in it must have been like 89.
Mm-hmm.
And I walk into I know Nation of Million, I mean Straight Outta Compton came out in 88. So sometime late 88, early 89. I think it was actually Christmas break of late 88, early 89. I was back in Philly and I walked into either it was Sounds of Market or Funko Mart.
Mm-hmm.
And Todd One, remember him? He was
I
like
remember
a
Taiwan. Yes.
Yes, he was a very famous, or not famous, but like a well-known Philly DJ and record guy,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And he I walk in and I'm like, I was now the source had some momentum and now I had my own radio show. So I was kind of feeling myself a little bit. I walk in and I'm like, hey man, I don't see NWA anywhere. Where's NWA? And he goes, NWA, man, that shit is garbage. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, what? I'm like, yo, people love that. He's like, no one in Philly likes that shit. Nobody likes that shit. That shit is straight garbage. And I'm like, okay, damn, I was shocked.
Right.
Meanwhile, it took like a whole year later, and every single car is playing Straight Outta Compton,
Mm-hmm.
But it was like the bubble was so strong still around New York and LA and Philly that like it took a whole year extra for like that to get penetrated by something as great as the NWA album,
The the ads in Billboard. I used to religiously read Billboard from like 86 to maybe 93, but whenever the any ruthless ad would be in Billboard magazine, I would just dismiss it because I was like, yo, they got 8 ball jackets and Jerry curls. They look like my cousins in LA. This has to be whack. I'm thinking that I don't want to get caught up in the Toddy T versus Dougie Fresh, uh,
Yes.
right, that sort of thing. And it wasn't until Tariq, like for some reason, Tariq's number one rule was like he rejected no hip hop. He was never biased against anything. So the fact that Hammer's rhyming over the Apache break and turned his mother out, the fact that like Tariq was like, I assure you, this is like Public Enemy level production. Like you'll love this. Just give it a chance. And finally, during lunch break, he played the first 3 songs of Straight Outta Compton. I was just like, what the hell is this? Like literally in lunchroom. So
Yes,
yeah,
that was
it
it took
it was word of mouth for a lot of us.
it took a long time for Philly and New York. So, but we had to be ahead of the curve on this. So kind of to answer your question, we had, the natural tastes of the people in, and I also want to mention Reef, Rob Tulo was another important figure in the source.
Shout out to Reef, yes.
Shout out to Reef. Chimo Du, rest in peace, an
Yeah.
incredible photographer. We can talk about him as well. Took so many iconic hip hop photos, including Tupac and Biggie and Nas and all these incredible legends the pictures that we all know to be the representative pictures of these artists is Chimo Du. So we just organically kind of attracted writers, photographers, and artists and producers and DJs and executives. And, even Reggie Osei came into the office and rest in peace. He was also an early writer for us. He was a very, headstrong, smart guy who had a lot to say. Cheo Coker, who's gone on to become, successful screenwriter in Hollywood. A number of people like that have gone through us. So yeah,
working with Che right now. Shout out to Che.
Nice. So yeah, so anyway, there's we as far as like to your question about like inside the magazine, who liked sort of De La versus Too Short or stuff like that. I mean, it's hard to say exactly. I mean, I think Maddie and myself and Reef kind of took on the more New York centric stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then Reggie and James kind of took on the more down south and West Coast stuff. That was sort of the general breakdown, but like, the records that, I mean, our ground zero for Maddie and myself would be like the Brand Nubian album 1990, like.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, that was our ground zero. Yeah.
That to me, that review. Yes, I heard a Brand Nubian. I believe I saw a Feel So Good video on Yo MTV Raps maybe once or twice. Yep. But the review, it's almost to the point where, and I also said this about Illmatic, I wondered if the review of the album winds up being like its own headliner. Like, is the reception of the source's perspective of an album bigger than the album itself? Because when I saw those 5 mics for All for One,
mm-hmm.
and I read the first line, it said Brand Nubian is New York.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it was positioned, I accepted it because I was like, oh, okay, so this album is a paradigm shift. This album is now how the next generation of New Yorkers are going to look, talk, and they broke down the language and the slang and the skins and all that stuff. And, I didn't know too much about, the 5% Nation and none of that, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And because I was told it was a classic, I just accepted it that it's you know what I mean? Like, that's how impressionable a 17-year-old receiving the information. Did you guys know at the time that was going to be, I think of all the reviews, the Brand Nubian getting 5 mics was the thing where suddenly I started to hear like of the whole regionalism thing and they don't respect our music and that sort of thing. Or not they don't respect our music, but like suddenly it matters what you guys think as opposed to, because I don't know if the lore of Brand Nubian would have kicked off if it were just all right, they got a 4. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, Brand Nubian. I mean, if you were around New York City in that year, I mean, that album leaked. That was that was an example of bootlegging. In those days when cassettes were bootlegged. But
so
that
how far
album,
in advance was it?
We had that cassette so far. I mean, the only one I think rivals it is Nas, and we can tell that story also. But basically, Brand Nubian was red hot in New York. I remember literally when Dante walked into a new music seminar party and they performed Oh, actually, I think they performed Wake Up, or one of their early singles. And I'm like, what is this? Because it had that funky groove on it. It had that
Mhm.
Parliament, I think, sample. But anyway, it was there was that record was so big in New York City during that 1990 period. Like every nightclub, or, if you go to, like, especially I would hang out a lot in the downtown New York club scene, listening to people like Stretch Armstrong and many others. And
Mhm.
those songs, I mean, you would hear like three, four album cuts a night, in one session, from Brand Nubian. That was so
So long before,
influential.
so long before its release, you
Yes.
guys had it for at least 5 to 6 months ahead of
Something
time.
like that. Something like that. Yes. I remember
Okay.
Maddie was the keeper of that cassette. And the only other, not the only, but we frequently got records, because back then, for those pre-internet days, we would get a cassette, and, because we had such a long lead time. I mean, we might be working, if it's August now, the issue we're working on might not come out until like October 1st or something. It was like so far ahead that we had to be always thinking in that frame. So we had to be thinking, like, what are people going to like? Whoever we put on the cover has to be who's hot like 2 to 3 months from now, basically. So because the reason was we had to finish all the work, send the issue off to get printed. It took a couple of weeks to get printed. Then it had to get distributed to all the distributors, and it was like a 2 month lead time before it actually ended up on the newsstand, at least. So because of that, we had that challenge, and the publicists knew that, so they would give us the cassettes, but that's when things would leak. So there was a big period, in the early '90s, when a lot of big albums, namely Brand Nubian and Illmatic in particular, got
Hmm.
leaked real crazy. I didn't leak either of them, but I did hear both of them very early on.